All right. So, Perry, I got to say, I have a hard time believing that you haven't actually heard of Deepseek because it has been taking the internet by storm. Surely you've seen the name.
Yeah, I've seen the name. I mean, it is so freaking out there to the point that I was like wondering if we should even mention it on the show because I think people are deep saturated at this point. But yeah, why not give some perspective?
Yeah, so Deepseek is all the headlines right now. It is an open source model that was released from China. Well, actually, it's several models. So we'll back up because a lot of the news stories right now are spinning Deepseek as though it's like a new company, and they've actually been a player for a while. They're a Chinese artificial intelligence company established in 2023. In November of 2023, they released their first series of model, which is the Deepseek Coder. And then later in that same month, back in 2023, they released Deepseek LLM series of models, which they made some improvements on in May of 2024 with the Deepseek V2. But then what has caused the biggest stir is just a few days ago, well, 9 days ago at the time of recording, on January 20th, they released Deepseek R10, which is a large language model trained via large-scale reinforcement learning without supervised fine-tuning, which to some people is just going to sound like technical jargon. But what it means is that they were able to train this model using far less resources than what we would consider traditional LLMs or like OpenAI's. But that might not entirely be true.
Yeah, so they put out the paper, and they're seemingly very transparent in what they're doing. So a lot of good, I think everybody agrees, there's a lot of good science in this.
Yeah.
And the people behind it are extremely smart and have really given the world a lot to chew on intellectually. Yeah. And so I think all of that is good. There's also a lot of skepticism because this is coming out of China, so there's Chinese government involvement. There's potentially interesting political and economic agendas that have to be weighed. There is data sovereignty issues, and all the stuff that people are thinking about with TikTok is coming back in Deepseek. And so that's causing a lot of interesting speculation, some things that may be conspiracy theories, some things that may not be conspiracy theories. There's economic impact in the U.S. with the stock market.
Yeah.
There's a ton of stuff.
There is.
The core of the bit around training is that in the paper, they mentioned that they trained this model using not the state-of-the-art chips that we have here in the U.S. They had to use downgraded chips because it's China and there's sanctions against the state-of-the-art chips. So they had not state-of-the-art chips and a fraction of the number of chips that are being used to train U.S.-based and other global models. And the training essentially cost $5.5 million. At least that's the stated number.
Yeah, that's the claim.
Yeah, that's the claim. And I'm glad you used the word claim because that it's easy to overthink about that $5.5 million and think that's all the research and development. That's the entire training run. That's everything else. But when you really look at it and you know what's going on, there's a lot more than that went into it. That may have been that one training run of just the computing cost and some of the other supporting costs. But this essentially is an optimized model that seems like it was probing GPT-4 for a lot of the core data. And so it's standing on the shoulders of billions and billions of dollars that have been spent by OpenAI and other companies.
Yeah. And I like that you mentioned it. I just want to highlight a little thing that you had said there too, is that $5 million could very well just be the final training run cost, not any of the iterations required to get there. But on top of that, talking about how it's possibly trained on GPT-4, let's dig into that for a minute, because the thing that was impressive about them using less hardware and worse hardware is that, well, they must have done this using clever optimizations in the training techniques. And that might well be true. Oops, I just changed all of the text on this Google Doc to massive. Give me 1 second. There we go. It's true that they did optimizations because they trained it slightly differently. So that reinforcement learning is reinforcing the output of the AI against an output that is good and making it guide its output to look more like that. So basically what you do is you have a teacher model and you have a student model, and you give them both the same prompt. The teacher model gives an output, the student model gives an output, but then you have this environment and this code running to compare the student's output to the teacher's and instruct the student model to guide its output to resemble the teacher's model more. And it seems there might be evidence that Deepseek here was using ChatGPT essentially to be that teacher model, which is against the terms of service. And it also, they took the human out of the equation, which is part of what speeds it up. Because usually you need a person to go through and say, this response is good. This response is bad. So that's what it means.
Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it means by large-scale reinforcement learning without supervised fine-tuning. The supervised fine-tuning is that human part. But to go more about the capabilities, just to cover the ground of like what it is we're looking at, Deepseek R1 is a large language model that is comparable to GPT 3.5. So it's not quite there at like the highest level frontier models, but its capabilities seem to be pretty close, and it's completely free and open weights. So you can download it and run it on your own hardware if you have the hardware to support that. There's issues with censorship, and we'll get into that later because we have a lot to cover here. And the other thing is they released another model like days later that is a multimodal model called Janus. Have you looked at all at what Janus is capable of?
I mostly looked at the image creation stuff, so I've not dove deeply into that part of DeepSeek.
Gotcha. So Janus is the multimodal model, meaning it can do text and images. I don't think it can do video. Don't quote me on that. I've seen people use it to generate images, and more importantly, the vision capabilities of giving it an image, asking it questions about that. And from comments I've seen online from people who've used it, because I haven't yet downloaded this to play with it myself, but it seems to be kind of mid as an image generator, but pretty good in its vision model compared to frontier models. Like I saw people asking it like, give it a picture of a room, ask it like, what's on the walls? What color are these walls? And like other AI models will be like, they're white, but this one will be like, actually, it's tiles with the tiny little inlays and all of this stuff. So impressive in some areas, not impressive in others, kind of like every other AI model, but
that would raise my surveillance hackles.
Oh, yeah.
Again, mostly knowing the origin of where these are coming from. You know, it's interesting because you mentioned that the capability is kind of like a GPT 3.5 level. When you look at a lot of the ways that people are comparing this against other models, a lot of the scoring is coming up at 4.0 and above. So some of that is subjective, right? Because people are doing blind tests with this against other things and rating outputs as thumbs up and thumbs down. And DeepSeek is actually outperforming some of the others in terms of what the perceived quality of output is. And then there's these other benchmarks, and it's kind of sporadically doing better and worse than other models. The thing that tends to come out over and over and over is, as I hear people talk about this, is their simulated reasoning model, which is kind of the competitor to O1 from OpenAI. And it shows the chain of thought, which is really interesting to a lot of people. And it has personality. Yeah,
and I was seeing, and I want to test this myself. I'm probably going to download and play with it today. I was seeing people talk about you can get it to extend its chain of thought longer and longer. Because, you know, if you can run it on your machine, you can... Right. You can do certain things, not all that you can't like fully deconstruct the model, but you could do things like make its chain of thought longer, force it to keep thinking about things. And I saw some interesting results from that because that seems to be pretty powerful. The just getting it really to contemplate. I mean,
well, and that goes back to like when people were talking about prompt engineering very heavily a couple of years ago, chain of thought and saying, take this step by step or explain your reasoning was always a very powerful way to make the model think a little bit more and to give better outputs. And so building that into the system prompt and building that into the ways that they've been trained and reinforced is showing itself to be really, really powerful.
And I'm wondering if the underlying mechanism, from what I understand, I feel as though the underlying mechanism there kind of makes an intrinsic sense because the context window is whatever it holds in its short-term memory as you're entering these prompts. And so if you're essentially filling a greater proportion of that context window with very related information by stretching this conversation out and making it sort of reinforce and repeat things, it would make sense that it gets better through those methods. And I mean, that relates back to how it was trained, right? So it's cool that it's free and open source and in the hands of independent researchers. The numbers about it like being trained on such a shoestring budget are a bit misleading, but the optimizations and the use of reinforcement learning to make it even more capable do seem like they could have a pretty positive knock-on effect in terms of AI development.
Yeah, and I think there's one other thing that we have to give them credit for in this is they had less resource by design. That was the way the U.S. and everybody else was kind of enforcing this through import controls and everything else. And necessity is the mother of invention. Mm-hmm. And what we see is that because they had less, they were able to figure out like how to do something competitive, and in some ways even more advanced with less. And that challenges us here in the U.S., where we believe if we just throw money and bigness at everything is bigger, right? Yeah. Everything is more expensive. We just throw a resource at it, then we're going to get a better outcome. And it's challenging that mentality, which is what's reflected in the stock market fluctuations and a lot of the hair pulling that's going on right now.
Yeah, and like Hutch mentioned, actually, way back in the interview we did with Hutch, the scaling race, right, is just the idea to scale it up and make it bigger without any paying attention to optimization has been the way to go. And then that $500 billion investment recently in Stargate to build new data centers that are just scaled up. People are talking about that maybe being in flux, but that is beyond the scope of what we can cover in this segment, and we're running over time.
And I definitely have opinions on that. And I guess just to close it out, I don't think that the investment that we're doing here in the U.S. is bad. I think we just reallocate resources, right? It's if you build a really big data source and you're thinking you're going to use that for training runs, well, there's other types of compute that will need to be done there. And we can hit on that a little bit later. But it's not resources wasted. It's resources that may be plugged into different places.
Totally. And also optimization is always good. And we should just, making this more efficient is not a bad thing.
No, not at all.
We're going to drop into our interview next that we had recorded a couple of weeks ago with the reader of the audiobook version of FAIK, Keith Brown, who is super cool. And we had a great conversation. I think you're going to really enjoy it. Stick around for that.
Yeah,